Good morning, everyone. I hope that all of you are finding your right place. And today, for me, it's a real pleasure to welcome you in the new and last session of our 2026 IQS-Harvard talks. And as you know, for if you have come other sessions, they are a series that aims to bring to our community. And when I said community, I mean the whole Ramon Llull University, not only IQS, outstanding academic voices like today, but these voices are bringing us ideas that challenge. And I think that this is the most important approach for the idea that we got 2 years ago having this series. And I think it's perfect for our this year talks, having the privilege of hosting Professor Amy Edmondson. Thank you. Amy Edmondson is a professor of leadership and management at Harvard Business School. And after me, Professor Comim will explain longer the expertise and whatever. But in any way, I like to highlight some points that they are very important for our university today, but also for this changing world that we have. She is one of the most influential thinkers in the field of organizational behavior. I think this is very important because we are a university, but we are also an organization. Her work has fundamentally reshaped how we, listen please, understand learning, teamwork, and performance in complex environments. When we work on that, I was surprised that how fit this work in how we have to shape our organization after our strategic plan that we are working on. She is widely known for introducing the concept of psychological safety, a simple yet powerful idea. Simple and powerful. People perform better when they feel safe to speak up, ask questions, and admit mistakes. I think this is a very important point. We have to admit our mistakes, and we don't need to be fear about that. That may sound intuitive, but it's transformative. And it's transformative from every organizations, from healthcare to technology and beyond, and I think you are going to show us some examples on that today. Her research reminds us that excellence is not only about talent or strategy. We have talent here, we have a strategy, I hope, but also about creating the right environment. One where curiosity is encouraged, where failure can be a source of learning, and where collaboration becomes a true driver of innovation. This resonates me deeply, and I think that we try to cultivate at IQS a community where rigor, creativity, and responsibility go hand in hand, and where learning is understood as a shared, continuous process. I recommend especially a book. You are going to explain more books, but for me, one of these very important is this book, The Fearless Organization. When you explore how organizations can thrive in a knowledge economy by fostering openness and trust. I think that we want to hear her, but Amy, thank you very much for being with us today, and it's truly an honor to have you at IQS. Please join me with an applause welcoming Professor Amy Edmondson.
I'm going to be very brief, just complement a little bit of what the General Director said. Now, I could begin, and I promise, a very short introduction of Professor Amy Edmondson by saying that it's a great honor to welcome her to IQS. It would be entirely true, but not say enough. I could say that it is a remarkable privilege to have her here with us and learn from her extraordinary expertise. Also true, but still incomplete. I could add that we are thrilled to have her here sharing her rigorous and inspiring research with us. And this too would be accurate, but also not enough. What I really would like to say is something that hopefully is simpler and more meaningful, is that her presence here today truly matters to us. It matters because it invites us to pause and reflect, to question several things we take for granted, and to imagine how we can do things better. Not only in the way that we work as individuals in our daily affairs, but also to imagine how we can learn from one another, how we lead, and how we can shape a future of our institutions as communities, committed to learning, research, and positive social impact. Now, she's the Novartis Chair of Leadership and Management at Harvard Business School. She has heard that so many times, so many introductions. A position dedicated to advancing the study of human interactions that enable organizations to contribute meaningfully to society. Before joining Harvard, she worked as a chief engineer for the visionary architect and inventor Buckminster Fuller, and served as director of research at the Pecos River Learning Centers, where she focused on transformational change in large organizations. Now, as many of us in the reading groups that we organized at IQS ahead of her visit, we have seen she doesn't talk only about organizational behavior or leadership or innovation. She invites us, and that's a disruptive thing, to see these not as separate fields, but as parts of a single, coherent story about how people learn and perform together. Her work is deeply interdisciplinary, perhaps unsurprisingly, given that she holds 3 degrees from Harvard University in 3 different fields, an AB in engineering and design, an AM in psychology, and a PhD in organizational behavior, where there was a lot about medicine as well over there. But her contribution goes well beyond credentials. She's the author of 7 books and more than 120 articles and case studies with economists like figures, with 32,000 citations. Her pioneering research on psychological safety that has been mentioned has actually shaped management thinking across disciplines. So I'm just going to mention, since one book has been mentioned, I'm going to mention The Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well, which has won the Financial Times and Schroeder's Business Book of the Year in 2023, and is being translated into more than 25 languages. And I'm almost finishing, but I just wanted to mention that she has been recognized consistently by the Thinkers 50 global list of top management thinkers for the last 15 years, most recently ranked number 2 in 2025 after holding number 1 position in 21 and 23. And she say, I don't care about that, and she's correctly so. She has received more than 40 awards, and I can see my wife say, please don't read all of them now. So I try to categorize the awards and honors for her research, teaching, and thought leadership. And her work has been featured in leading global media outlets. I'm not going to mention all of them. But the more than 3 million views of her TED Talk on teaming is another example of her far-reaching impact. Now, to finish, just to mention that in her latest book, she showed to us, through stories drawn from her research, parenting, and creative work, that learning and innovation depend not on avoiding failure, but on engaging with it intelligently. She reminds us that productive failure is unavoidable, often uncomfortable, and absolutely essential. And that is not only the subject of her scholarship, but a principle she lives by. Now, Professor Edmondson, thank you very much for being with us today, and please join me in giving her a very warm welcome.
Let's see. I'm fine. I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you so much. What a generous introduction. I didn't know some of those things myself. So it's a privilege and an honor to be here. I started my academic career, as a kindergartner at St. Ignatius Loyola in New York City. So I am a product of the Jesuits in some form or another. And they, what I truly took away from those times was a deep sense of moral responsibility and awareness. I didn't so much take away the idea it was okay to be wrong, I have to say. That wasn't very much a part of the education. In fact, I took away that you were supposed to be right as often as possible. So let me back up. In some form or another, throughout all of this academic work, I've been studying failure. I didn't set out to study failure. I set out to study organizational learning and innovation, and how do we stay up? How do we adapt? How do we improve? How do we innovate in a world that keeps frustratingly changing on us? And that seemed to be both psychologically and organizationally quite challenging. It still does today. But along the way, all of those aspirations mean I became a student of failure, my own and those of others. And I guess in all of that time, I've come away with a conclusion that I'm quite happy to share with you, which is that failure, like it or not, is a part of life. Right? And especially a part of work life. So that's where I do want to go. Do I have to get it?
Might have failed on that.
Well, it has to be sort of anchored in the deck, probably.
It should be, because it's not here. So let's see, if not this way or this way.
It might be that, there we go, perfect, okay. Down is up,
Yeah,
okay, or down is forward, good to know. So my first failure. So, well, actually, I'll go back for just a second to say what this is. I'm sure you already registered what this beautiful image is. This is DNA, and I don't know if any of you here today or virtually study DNA or actually manipulate these tiny chemicals for a living, but that is what Jennifer Heemstra does. Now, Jen is a chemist, a professor at Washington University in the United States, very successful scientist, and if you think that means she succeeds all the time, you'd be wrong. In fact, Jen estimates, and here she is, that 9 out of 10 failures in her busy lab, thank you, end in failure. All right, so how does she get out of bed in the morning? Well, in fact, that is what I want to explore with you today. Now, this is Jennifer, and in an interview that I did with her for the most recent book, she said this is what she has to tell her students, her young postdocs and PhD students and others. She says, with a smile, we're going to fail all day, right? And you think, what? Well, actually, if you know anything about science, you know that is just factually true. So then you ask yourself, why does she feel a need to say it? And that's where we step back and think, well, who goes on to get into a PhD program in chemistry, right? Very smart, very capable young people. In fact, most of whom who have never gotten a poor mark in their whole life, right? So what Jennifer understands is that she needs to detoxify failure, or else they just won't take risks, right? If they enter this new career, this new stage of their lives thinking they have to be right, they'll be wrong. They'll never get anywhere. They'll never succeed as a scientist. So she feels a deep obligation, and so do I, to detoxify failure, to remind people, to help them understand it, not just intellectually, which I think they all do, but emotionally, that failure is a part of the journey. Failure is a part of making progress in any field, or, frankly, any sport, any life journey, like finding a partner. I mean, all of these things require, I know it, failure along the way. So, okay, that's science, right? I teach at a business school, not a chemistry department. So I have to look to people like this. This is David Kelly, co-founder of IDEO. Have you heard of IDEO? Right? See lots of nods. IDEO is probably the most celebrated innovation consultancy in the world. Offices around the world, still quite a small firm, but they get touted a lot for their remarkable work helping companies around the world to be more innovative, to come up with products and services that delight their customers. Now, David will say, much like Jen, and he'll ask the teams working for him, fail often, he'll say, fail often to succeed sooner. Again, I like to call this the Silicon Valley happy talk. You know what I'm talking about? It's the entrepreneurship talk, like fail often. Yeah, right. Again, not where I went to school, not where my first job was as an engineer. I wasn't told to fail. Not quite fair, but I was hoping things would stand up when I was done with them. And so it's tempting to think this language, this idea, is like a new ethos in business, right? And so much so that in more than 200 cities, in more than 62 countries around the world, there are even celebrations like this. And excuse my language, it's not mine, it's theirs, but I'll just call them failure parties, right? You heard about this stuff, right? So you almost begin to think people love failure. Yeah, well, here's the problem, right? Here is indeed the problem. Deep down, back to elementary school, we know failure is bad, right? We want to be right, not wrong. We want to look good, not bad. We learn this at an early age, and by the time you're a working adult, it's all but second nature, right? And so our psychology and our logic are in tension, and that's where I think as leaders in organizations, as educators, even as team members, we all need to help each other overcome this natural, spontaneous, and then well-socialized aversion to failure, right? Because it's going to get in our way and increasingly get in our way in today's world. So, we have this sort of socialization, and then today, our workplaces can make it a lot worse. So some years ago, just a few, I was meeting with senior executives at a large financial services firm. I won't tell you which one. And they said, yeah, we love the fail fast stuff. That's great. They said, but now, given the challenge and uncertainty that lies ahead, they said, now it's important that everything go well. Right? Yeah, I didn't laugh, but I almost did, right? So here's the problem, right? It's wishful thinking. Now, it is tempting in turbulent times to declare failure off limits, right? It's tempting to double down on demands for excellence. And that's okay so long as you realize that excellence does involve failure. But here's the problem. Two things. One, in uncertain, challenging times, failure is more likely than ever, right? Two, in uncertain and challenging times, innovation is more important than ever. And innovation requires failure. So what these leaders, and I think the rest of us, needed to understand is, yes, there are failures we should work hard to avoid. And there are failures we must learn to love. The challenge is in distinguishing which is which. And that's really what I want to do with you today. So at this point, I think it's almost fair to say there's two cultures in business, maybe in the world. One that says failure is so great and wonderful, let's do it. And the other says, sorry, failure is off limits. By the way, when you as a leader declare failure off limits, either explicitly as they were doing or implicitly through your behavior, what should you expect? Should you expect perfection? Probably not. What you should expect is to be kept in the dark, right? Things will still go wrong, but you won't hear about it. Well, maybe that's what they were trying to do. I don't think so. So, which view is right, I'm going to argue, is the wrong question, right? The right question, or maybe not the right question, but a better question in today's world, and this is just even so much more true than when this book came out almost 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, is this. How do we change our thinking? How do we hardwire or softwire our thinking so that all of us can be more effective in a world that just keeps changing, right? Now, that's a little bit abstract. So let me give you a concrete example. Most of us, certainly I, grew up with the following mental model, right? Theory of action, which is this. If you work hard, you're more likely to get success. If you don't put in the effort, you're more likely to get failure, right? You won't get the good grades and so on. And guess what? This is sometimes true, often true even. But here's what's also true. Sometimes you really work hard and you get failure. Just ask Jennifer Heemstra or any scientist you know, right? 9 out of 10 times, she says, our experiments are wrong. And sometimes, yes, you mail it in, you don't work hard, and you get lucky, right? You get a success. So I'm not saying there is no relationship between effort and success. Of course there is, or none of you would be here. What I am saying is that in today's world, this relationship is imperfect at best, right? We need to change our thinking to be more effective in an uncertain world. Context matters, of course. Now, I'm a very simple thinker, so I like to divide work environments into 3 basic archetypes. Archetype 1, consistent contexts, like manufacturing, like many other service operations where we have remarkably good predictive ability. Right? If you stand on the end of that Toyota production line, every 57 seconds, a little new vehicle will roll off the end, just like clockwork. Absolutely consistent context. Very mature knowledge about how to get the result we want. Now, in the middle, I call them variable contexts, like an operating room, like a supply chain, like consulting, like so much of what we do today, where you do have very good knowledge about how to get the result you want. And there's uncertainty, and there's variability, and there's often a need to really customize your thinking, your expertise to suit the problem of the moment, right? I call those variable contexts because they're variable. And then finally, as we get all the way to the right, we have novel contexts. And these are the environments where, at this moment, we don't yet have the knowledge we need to get the result we want, right? So as we go to the right, uncertainty goes up. Definitionally. Guess what else goes up? Like it or not, failures. Right? So the failure rate goes up and up. It has to. So it's what good looks like. If you're Jennifer Heemstra, good, being a great scientist, might mean failing 90% of the time. The Toyota folks on the line would not accept that failure rate. Okay? So that's just, sort of a deep intuition that we need to have. Now, here's a trick question. What about mistakes? Should the rate of error go up as we go to the right? Well, it's a trick question because it in part depends on how we define these terms. But my trick answer is no. In fact, so let me give you my definitions, which I think are important. In fact, I think one of the really important leadership responsibilities is to make sure people don't equate these two phenomena as the same thing. So what's a mistake? A mistake is defined by the dictionary and by the organizational literature as an unintended deviation from existing knowledge, procedures, rules, policies, right? Unintended matters, right? If it's intended, we call that sabotage, right? Unintended means you did it, you didn't mean to. You didn't mean to do it. Now, every now and then, a mistake leads to some happy discovery like penicillin. But most of the time, we make mistakes. They're not all that useful. Now, what's a failure? A failure is an outcome. So a mistake is a process deviation. A failure is an undesired result. It's an outcome that deviates from what we were hoping. Now, that covers a lot of territory. So I need to say that not all failures are alike, and I'll explain that in a moment. But let's go back to this, right? So no reason to believe that human beings will accidentally deviate from existing knowledge more in a laboratory than on an automotive assembly line, right? We're all fallible. We all make mistakes sometimes. That's okay. Let's find them, catch them, correct them, learn from them. But there's no necessary reason that we can err more on the right than the left. But what I can say with some confidence is this. As we go to the right, to succeed in your career, in your life, the more you go to the right, the more you are required to experiment. And experiment thoughtfully. We'll go there. We'll go there soon. So context matters. I'm not going to propose a one-size-fits-all way to lead or way to think or way to be. We need to be very context aware as human beings. I think we need to be self-aware, context aware, and ultimately system aware. Okay, 3 kinds of failure that I've identified in my research. The first is pretty basic. I call it basic failure. Here is a very good example of a basic failure. Back in 2020, a Citibank employee made a mistake, checked the wrong box in an online form, and transferred $900 million to a group of lenders. Essentially, the principal, rather than the interest, which was $8 million, accidentally transferred $900 million to a group of lenders. Okay, that's pretty basic. I use this example because I want you to be clear that this is not sorting by size. It's sorting by type. So basic doesn't mean small. Now, there was a court case, as you can imagine, because Citibank wanted that money back. And somehow the ruling called finders keepers meant that Citibank did not get these funds back, right? So, pretty big failure. But here's my definition, because it doesn't have to be something this big, economically, that is. A basic failure has a single cause, usually human error, as this one, and in familiar territory. In other words, there was a right way to do it, and that didn't happen. Basic, single, simple cause. All right. These happen. Do you think they're preventable? Of course they are. Through training, through awareness, through teamwork, we can prevent most basic failures. We can drive them out of our organizations. In fact, that is what the Toyota production system is so beautifully, and I'll come back to this, but that's what it's designed to do, is to help fallible human beings avoid basic failures. Okay, now, the second kind, complex failures. These are on the rise, unfortunately, in our complex interdependent world. But let me tell you what they are. So here's a good illustration. I actually opened the chapter of the book on complex failures with this story. Torrey Canyon, an oil tanker, long, long ago, 1967, hit the reef off the Isles of Scilly, British Isles, and tore open 14 tanks, spilled 13 million gallons of crude oil into that beautiful sea. To this day, Britain's worst environmental tragedy in history. Right? Okay, you might wonder, what caused it? Well, let me tell you what caused it. Here goes. Well, number 1, there was time pressure. So if you're thinking, okay, all we have to do is make sure there's no time pressure at work, and we can, well, that might be true, but not helpful. So time pressure the next day would be particularly deep waters because of the tides, and it would be economically helpful to get to harbor by tomorrow. So everybody was feeling the pressure. Number 2, the captain stayed up late. Again, don't stay up late. You'll be fine. Number 3, actually, that's not a thing to say in Spain, is it? People do stay up late, as I understand it. So ocean currents took the ship slightly off course overnight, and the first officer changed course without permission, and 2 lobster boats appeared suddenly on the horizon out of the fog. And finally, a small mechanical problem in the steering wheel inhibited full rudder responsiveness, making the inevitable happen. So the essence here of a complex failure, in the court case, Captain Rugiati said, many little things added up to one big disaster. That's virtually my definition, except I'll give you my formal definition of a complex failure, which is when multiple contributing factors come together in just the wrong way to produce a deeply undesired outcome. That's a complex failure. Now, as I said before, the bad news is complex failures are on the rise in our uncertain, interdependent, complex world. The good news, though, is that they are preventable. And because they have a long list of contributing factors, quite often, all you have to do, organizationally or individually, is catch and correct one, maybe two of the contributing factors, and none of it will happen, right? So they give us lots of opportunities to catch and correct. I think one thing to take away here is that all of us, from now forward, must realize that we're in the catch and correct business, right? We're not in the perfection business. So a much more recent, but equally vivid example is this one. I suspect many of you remember either waking up or seeing the news and seeing this kind of devastating fire, this devastating complex failure. Again, I leave Captain Rugiati's words. Many little things added up. If you ever have wondered what caused this, in fact, I wrote a case study about it. I won't go through all of these, but it's a whole bunch of different things, any one of which, if we take it out of the equation, we probably could prevent this devastating failure. I don't have time to jump into the remarkable success of the recent renovation, but it is certainly an opportunity for celebration. Okay, so here's my typology. Basic failures, complex failures, and you guessed it, the third kind, the good kind, the right kind of wrong, intelligent failures. I will also give you an example of an intelligent failure, so we flesh out the sort of full menu here, and it requires me going back only 10 years or so. Eli Lilly, giant pharmaceutical company based in the US, global company, had a promising new cancer drug for lung cancer called Alimta. They did the trials to show that it was safe for use in humans, and then you get to what's called phase 3 trials to show that it actually addresses and drives into remission the cancer the drug is supposed to address. Go through the whole trial. When you design a trial as a scientist or as a company, you want to get just the right number of people, no more than necessary, just the right length of time, just the right doses. You're very thoughtful in designing that to minimize harm and resources needed, right? And so you do it hoping like crazy that you're right. This is, after all, a talk about failure, so I will let you know that, in fact, what happened here was it failed. It failed to show statistically that Alimta treated and drove into remission the cancer in question. Okay, so right kind of wrong, right? Well, I'll give you the criteria in just a moment. The Alimta story has an interesting ending, and I will come back to it, I promise. But I'll leave you in suspense for now and address the more fundamental question, which is, what allows a failure to qualify as intelligent? Almost sounds like an oxymoron. And the definition I'll give you is that it's undesired. You bet. I mean, were the scientists at Lilly disappointed? Absolutely they were. So it's an undesired result of a thoughtful, highly well-designed journey into new territory. We've never been here before. Let's get technical. Criterion, 4.5 criteria. Criterion 1, the territory is genuinely new. Right? If you can find the answer on the internet or ask an expert, please do. No need to waste time or resources. So genuinely new territory in pursuit of a goal, curing cancer, for example. You've done your homework. Right? You have good reason to believe, as did the scientists at Lilly, that this might work. And finally, importantly, no bigger than necessary. Right? The trial is not gigantic, not global. It's just the right number to get the new knowledge that we currently lack, but desperately need. Okay? Scientific progress, right? What's the half criterion, do you think? Well, when you get a failure, as did Lilly, you're disappointed, I promise you. No matter how cheerful a scientist you are, you're disappointed. So you've paid for it, get your money's worth. So the half criterion, or really, truly, the fifth criterion is this. Make sure you learn what that failure is trying to teach you. That's the right kind of wrong. Now, it's not a new idea, is it? There's Thomas Edison, the very famous inventor of so many things, was approached some years ago when, as an inventor in his lab. Some young intern came up to him and said, "It must be so hard for you, all those failures." Edison apparently looked genuinely puzzled and said, "Failed? I haven't failed. I've just learned 10,000 ways that don't work," right? So Edison understood the right kind of wrong. It's clear. Any inventor, any scientist, and I want to say any innovator understands the right kind of wrong. You have to be wrong on the way to being right. But just because you're innovating, right? Just because your job or your department is to be an innovator doesn't mean you're automatically going to adopt the right mindset and the right procedures to do so. Let me clarify. Let me give you an example. So I wrote a case study. Oops, shoot. Forgot this came first. But actually, it's not so bad. This is the whole premise here. What's the right question? How do we change our thinking to be more effective in an uncertain world? Well, many of us, like it or not, either from our early education or our more classical higher education, learned some of the habits of the classic management mindset where, you're supposed to have the answer. You're supposed to set targets. You're supposed to deliver. If you're a manager, you evaluate, or a teacher, you evaluate people. How good are they? Your job is to ensure execution flawlessly and avoid failure at all costs. This is deeply ingrained. I happen to be married to a scientist in addition to studying them, and here's their mindset. Their job is to have good questions, right? Their job is to set the direction, not to have all the answers, to emphasize learning, to enable people to take risks, to ensure experimentation, hopefully smart experimentation, to expect failure along the way, right? This is not deeply ingrained. This is a fundamental mindset shift that all of us, I think, even if we're not scientists today, need to embrace. So I like to say, think like a scientist. And I don't mean you have to literally play with DNA, but you have to be willing to kind of think in this new way. So now, here's a case study, really 20 odd years ago now, but one of the telecommunications companies in the US, I won't say which one, but it's in a very, very large urban market. And it, by the way, just about 100 years old at the time, a very, very successful company with something like mid-90 percentile customer service happiness scores, right? All customers are pretty happy with their service at this time. They have a debate in the top team, which I'm privileged to watch, about whether or not to launch a brand new innovative technology to allow customers to get high-speed internet access that they currently want but lack. And so it's a big debate. Should we do it? Should we not do it? Is it gonna work? Is it gonna not work? They do a pilot, as one does. Innovators are responsible for running pilots to help us answer the question, does it work? Okay. The pilot was a smashing success. So, not surprisingly, the executives made the decision to announce and launch the new tech in the large urban market. And guess what happened? This is a talk about failure after all. So this was not just a failure, though. This was a colossal fiasco-level failure. Something like 15,000 orders were late. The new tech division missed 80% of its commitments. More than 500 customers a day were getting busy signals trying to address some aspect of their service. Oh, the customer service ratings went from the mid-90s to 13, right? Just way down here at the floor. They had not seen scores like that since the days of Alexander Graham Bell, right? Just was unheard of to have customers be so very unhappy. Employee morale plummeted. And I forgot to mention, Telco was in the midst of a rebranding campaign. It was later estimated that this failure cost the company more than $10 million in direct and legal costs. Okay, I think you get where I'm going. Not the right kind of wrong, right? So just because we're in an innovation context doesn't guarantee us that our failures are smart. I'm going to suggest this one wasn't so smart. And here's why. It violated the fourth criterion. Right? New territory, absolutely. Pursuit of a goal, you bet. Customers really wanted this, and it could be a big money maker. Good reason to believe it could work. Well, the engineers told us it could. No bigger than necessary? Oops. Right? So here's my question, my provocative question. Why didn't the pilot help telco prevent the fiasco? That is, after all, the purpose of the pilot. Now, you may be thinking, and you'd be right, well, it wasn't representative, it was suburban, it was small, it was well-staffed, it was not realistic operating conditions, and you'd be right. But here's my playful answer to this question. The pilot didn't prevent the fiasco because the pilot was a success, right? So, okay. Is she really saying, Harvard professor saying you should fail? Yes, Harvard professor saying you should fail. Really, it's a good example, because you want to say more deeply, it's a good example of the classic management mindset that was so well developed at telco, they didn't even know they had it. Right? It's the Marshall McLuhan, the Canadian futurist, said, we don't know who discovered water, but we're pretty sure it wasn't fish. Right? So the executives at telco didn't discover the management mindset. They embodied it. And that got in the way of their innovation. Now, obviously, I'm not here to tell you, go make your pilots be terrible failures. Not at all. What I am saying is that pilots should fail, but fail in a particular way. Fail well. 4 essential diagnostic questions that you can use to make sure you have smart pilots. Right? Number 1, is the pilot being tested in typical operating conditions, or is it rigged to succeed, as this one was? Number 2, is it clear that the purpose of the pilot is to learn, not to prove to higher ups how great is my new invention, right? And number 3, is it clear that no compensation or performance ratings are going to be based on how well the pilot goes, right? Because pilots should fail in small, smart ways. And finally, did they make any changes after that beautiful pilot? If not, that probably means they didn't learn anything. So what I'm saying here with these questions is the scientific mindset would be a more curious approach. Like, let's find out. Let's stress test it, right? Let's find out what works every time. So you could say good pilots, yes, new territory, all the rest, and each and every iteration of the new innovation is coming up against its limits so that we can find where the problems are and catch and correct them before we go to scale. Right? So a good pilot is really more piloting rather than a pilot and then a launch, but a more kind of iterative approach into the future, an approach that I think intellectually many of us now take for granted, but emotionally, psychologically, operationally, maybe not so fast. So what is this really about? How do we change our thinking to be more effective in today's world? It's going to require us to take the intelligence of intelligent failure to heart, to really believe it, not just a line, not something you say, not something the leaders of organizations say, but each and every one of us have to understand that in new territory, and we're all facing a lot of new territory these days, the only way to succeed, the only way to make progress is through what I call trial and failure. Now, you will notice I don't use the more traditional term, trial and error. Why? Because it's not error. You can't have error in new territory, right? We just don't know yet, right? So trial and failure. But, here's the challenge. Of the 3 types, only intelligent failures aren't preventable because we don't yet know. We don't have the knowledge yet. But they are avoidable. Now, this might be a language thing, but you might hear me as contradicting myself. There's a slight distinction here, right? Preventable versus avoidable. How do we avoid intelligent failures? Just don't take risks, right? Color within the lines. Don't do anything new or different. So Roberto Ferrara, one of these wonderful sketch artists, made and posted this, which I think captures it, right? This isn't failure. missing the bullseye with the darts. On the right is failure, leaving the darts on the wall because you're afraid to fail. So I call this, playing not to lose, right? And many of us, like it or not, are playing not to lose much of the time. Here's another example. This is one I like to use to show and illustrate something of the mindset that you need to succeed in an uncertain world. So at Harvard Business School, we have an alumnus, he's gotten pretty famous actually, called Ray Dalio. He started a firm called Bridgewater Associates, big financial services firm. He graduated from the school in 1972. He went on to become such a success, such a remarkably successful financier, that he was routinely on television, on the business news, to talk about the economy, to talk about the stock market, and so forth. And Ray Dalio was particularly proud of his ability to predict long-term trends. In the early 80s, he predicted that because of economic indicators that he was paying attention to, that the stock market was going to take a dive downward. And so he bet everything the firm had, everything he had personally, on that prediction. And guess what? He failed. He failed miserably. In fact, Ray says he had to borrow money from his dad to pay his family's bills, right? So really, again, we see the formula, right? All of this new territory, investing is always new territory. In pursuit of a goal, he thought he'd make a ton of money. With doing his homework, did he have a hypothesis? Of course he did. Nobody was a better student of the market than Dalio. As small as possible, oops, again. Now, I tell this story because Dalio credits it with his subsequent success. He says that in retrospect, that failure was the best thing that ever happened to me. Really? Seriously? Yep. He says, it gave me the humility I desperately needed to balance my aggressiveness with what I would say with curiosity, to balance my aggressiveness and shift my mindset. How do we change our thinking, right? Shift my mindset from thinking I'm right, which all of us have to a certain degree. We look around, we think we see reality. We are seeing it through a filter of which we're unaware. So I needed to shift my mindset from thinking I'm right to asking myself, now this might sound like a very small mindset shift to you. How do I know I'm right? Right? Very small, but very profound, right? He has suddenly introduced curiosity. Like, I'm going to just step back and say, let me rethink this, right? What might I be missing? One of the things that I talk about in the book and that I really advocate and care about is that learning that self-awareness, learning that habit of curiosity. We have to choose learning because knowing chooses us, right? We have to choose curiosity, and especially in a complex, changing world. So how do we change our thinking? It means adopting a profoundly different notion of what is excellence today. Well, I think excellence is doing everything in your power, both individually and in an organizational setting, to drive basic failures out of the organization. Again, that's what Toyota is all about. To work very hard to prevent basic failure, deviations in familiar territory. To work very hard to anticipate and mitigate, and in fact, often prevent complex failures. And to work just as hard to increase the rate of intelligent failures. Right? Now, the problem is psychologically, this is intellectually easy. Psychologically, this means that, as I said, we're all in the catch and correct business. This means that we need to be vigilant and we need to be willing to take risks, to experiment in new territory where we might be wrong. Both of those things, both speaking up about error, catching error, and experimenting, require what I call psychological safety. And this was mentioned earlier, but let me give you my definition, which actually was perfectly described by the general director. But my definition is this. It's a belief, it's an environment that the context is safe for interpersonal risks like speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, even mistakes and failures. Yes, you feel vulnerable. Yes, this is hard to do. and it's essential for innovation, and it's essential in a complex changing world to prevent the preventable kinds of failures as well. Because psychological safety has gotten so popular in the last decade or so, there are many misconceptions, and I'll just share a couple so that you don't have them, right? Psychological safety is not about being nice, right? Being nice is the easy way. Being nice is, I'm not going to say what I really think because it wouldn't be nice. It's not about feeling comfortable. It's not that everything will go your way. And importantly, it's not lowering standards, right? Too many people in the early days when I was talking about this, especially in medicine, they'd say, okay, we're all for learning. We want learning. We get it. But are you saying we have to dial it down on performance standards? I'm saying, no. 2 dimensions, not 1, but 2. There are 2 leadership dimensions here, 2 educational dimensions, I would argue as well. One is a sense of felt permission for candor, psychological safety. The other is a commitment to high standards, the pursuit of excellence. If you don't do a good job, whether as a leader or an educator in either one, you'll find people in the apathy zone, right? This is where they quit and stay. Their heart's not in it. I'm not so worried about that for you, not in this institution. But this would be one that many people worry about. Again, I see less worry of being in the comfort zone, just relaxing in most of the organizations I study. But this, what I call the anxiety zone, I see far too often. And let me be clear, it's not about being anxious about the deadline or anxious about the competitors or anxious about, the problem you're trying to solve. It's about being anxious about each other, not feeling permission for candor because you want to look good. That's dangerous in an uncertain, complex, interdependent world. So this is where we need to be. I call it the learning zone, but honestly, it's the high performance zone, so long as there's uncertainty or interdependence, let alone both, right? In an uncertain, interdependent environment, unless you have a commitment to excellence and permission for candor, you're unlikely to perform well. You certainly can't get much innovation to happen. So we do have to think about that environment. Now, just for a quick test, right? My finance colleagues, they're always talking about ratios, it makes them sound smart. So I'll do it too, right? So, in a given week, for example, think how much do you hear? What percent is red versus green, right? How much are you hearing good news versus bad or problems versus all's well, I need help, success versus failure, in other words. Now, if you're hearing a lot of green, I guarantee you had a better week, right? I also can almost, but not quite guarantee that you're not getting the full story, right? So what should you expect? If you declare failure off limits, you should expect to be kept in the dark. And that's not actually what you want. It might feel good, but it's not what you want. So these are sort of 4 survey items that I will sometimes use to try to convey the environment we're talking about. So, to what extent do people in your work environment score high on an item that says, we're empowered to take risks, we have a healthy mindset around failure, especially smart failure, and also we're all fallible. We all have the other kinds occasionally. Or are we more management mindset, right? That hitting your targets is the only way to get ahead, reverse scored. Or if you make a mistake around here, it's held against you, right? You definitely want to hide them. So just to kind of give you a little bit of a sense that really what we're talking about here might be a talk about failure, but really it's a talk about uncertainty, sort of taking it to heart, right? How much can we really accept it? So now I just want to shift gears and say, well, what can you do, right? If you appreciate the essence of how we have to change our thinking, what can you do and how can you help others change their thinking to be more effective in an uncertain world? And I'm going to say 3 simple things. Now, please know, at least in English, simple is not synonymous with easy. Sometimes these things can be hard, but they are fundamentally simple. Simple thing number 1 is this: set the stage by emphasizing, calling attention to a compelling purpose, right? To motivate people. Why does it matter that we work hard to do this work or that work, right? Just kind of getting people on the same page. And number two, call attention to the nature of the work, especially call attention to the nature of the work that, it might involve failure, or things might go wrong on the way to being right, that it's innovation, that it's novel, etc., uncertain, interdependent, whatever. Let me give you an example, because that's quite abstract. Ken Frazier is the former CEO of Merck, the U.S. Merck, which, again, a global pharmaceutical company, shown here. And in this one marvelous statement that he said in my classroom, he does both, right? He does both of these things quite beautifully. He emphasizes a compelling purpose, and he calls attention to context. So he says, the business we're in, biomedical research, it's all about failure, right? Like it or not. Unlike those financial services executives, he's standing right there and saying it. We will experience a lot of failure, but every single one of those failures is giving us valuable information we did not have before, right? So every study contributes to our knowledge that helps us go forward and makes this compelling contribution to society in the form of drugs that bring us closer to a solution. So I think that really good leaders are fluent in doing this. They don't even think about it, right? But the rest of us, we have to think about it, right? How can we call attention to the nature of the work, and how can we make sure people understand and appreciate how important it is that they lean in and do it well, right? That purpose component. But let's get technical about this. Context. Before I talked about you can be consistent, variable, novel. I'm now going to add the vertical dimension so that we have a map. The vertical dimension is, what are the stakes? And by stakes, I mean the potential consequences. In terms, first and foremost, of human safety. We don't want to hurt people. We don't want loss of life. We don't want physical harm at work or elsewhere. Number two, economic, of course, right? Ray Dalio, are we gonna invest more than we can afford to lose? And number three, reputational. I'll tell you, telco reputations suffered greatly from their not so smart failure. So that gives us, I know you would think that would give us 6 contexts, but in my estimation, it's really only 4, but they're weirdly overlapping. So let's start with the first one. In very well understood, but nonetheless high stakes contexts, like very high speed rail, what's the leadership advice? What's the operational advice? Vigilance, mindful execution, right? Do what you know how to do as flawlessly as humanly possible, right? Okay, let's go to the right. In more variable or novel contexts, when the stakes are high, super cautious action and very thoughtful, very small, very careful experimentation. Okay, so one of the flaws or errors that I've seen routinely and have written about and documented in many case studies is the failure to be cautious enough in highly risky environments, right? To make preventable failures because we weren't vigilant enough. But here's another one, a little bit stranger, right? I've also seen people hold back in low stakes situations where they should be having fun, experimenting and learning. This is what Jen Heemstra is trying to get her young scientists to do. Have fun experimenting. Behind closed doors here, the stakes are super low, right? Take smart risks. And then finally, only in these domains here is it okay to be a little bit casual, right? Stakes are low, knowledge is relatively high, fine. The 2 errors you can make are, number 1, failing to be cautious when the stakes are high, as we go to the right or anywhere, and failing to have fun experimenting when the stakes are low. And I'll illustrate all of those. But so let me give you some examples of leaders I think get this right, do it well. Jen Heemstra would be one, but here's aviation. So what kind of context is this? Now you might think routine, like, we do it all the time. Nah, it's variable, right? Highly mature knowledge. We know how to fly planes safely, and every day is different, right? It's never the same. So it's high stakes, life and death, obviously, variable context. So I interviewed Ben Berman, aviation safety expert and very senior captain at one of the U.S. airlines. And he told me that for every new cockpit crew, which is frequent occurrence for high status pilot, many thousands of hours of flying under his belt, he said, when I have a new cockpit crew, here is how I open the briefing meeting. I've never flown a perfect flight, he admits, and it won't happen today either. I need to hear from you. Right? Look at that. He's setting the stage. He's also reminding them of what's at stake. But he's setting the stage as, I am a fallible human being. Your voice is absolutely essential to making sure we do this right. Now, in some ways, what he just said is obvious, right? However, you can almost be sure that the people who showed up that day to report to him in a hierarchy, a very meaningful hierarchy, are thinking of their work as routine, right? We do it every day. Thousands of hours under our belt, right? So he's saying, nope, sorry, it's not routine. It's variable, and I need you, and I will make a mistake. Now, Ben did admit to me in the interview that it really bothers him that he's never that he's never flown a perfect flight, right? He says, gosh, he would love to fly a perfect flight, but it hasn't yet happened, so he is quite human. But this has been setting the stage, high stakes in a variable context. Or what about Toyota, right? What about the most consistent environment of all? Well, this is Fujio Cho, who was ended his career as chairman of Toyota Worldwide. But back in the early 90s, he was plant manager in Georgetown, Kentucky, at the first ever Toyota plant in North America, fully run and owned by Toyota. They hired only Americans, including in the management ranks. And there was a manager named Jim Wiseman who tells a remarkable story of the day, or as he puts it, the moment he realized that Toyota wasn't just another workplace, but a different way of thinking about work. Right? How do we change our thinking to be more effective in an uncertain world? A different way of thinking. Okay, what was that day? Senior staff meeting. Jim Wiseman is there with Mr. Cho, and all of the top people at the plant are there. And Jim starts talking, according to his own story, about some successes that he and his team had had. He said, I boasted a little. I spoke very positively about what we were doing. And Mr. Cho kind of looked at me. I could see he was puzzled. Now, I put the emphasis here because I love this story, because how many of you have worked in a hierarchical organization, most of us, where a senior person looks puzzled when a junior person reports good news? Never. Right? Doesn't happen. That's normal. That's the water, right? The fish swimming around in that water. That's absolutely normal. So it was a light bulb moment for Jim Wiseman. He suddenly realized Toyota is serious. They're serious about this. It's not just a line. It's not just rhetoric. It's true. So Mr. Cho went on to say, Jim-san, we know you're a good manager, right? Here's his puzzlement. Or we wouldn't have hired you, but please talk to us about your problems so we can work on them together. In that beautiful response, he's doing two things. One, he's reframing the work. In a consistent context, 99% of what happens is just as expected. But don't use our precious time telling us about the 99. We're a group of smart people here. We need you to share your problems. Problem solving is a team sport, right? Problem solving is how we get ever so slightly better tomorrow than we were today. So even in the most consistent environment of all, there's still room for learning, but you have to change your thinking, even in this low stakes, consistent context. Now we go back to David Kelly. We saw him before, but now we understand why it's so appropriate that he says what he says. It's not just Silicon Valley happy talk, fail often to succeed sooner. But David truly works in and leads other people working in a low stakes, behind closed doors, highly novel context. All the projects they're trying to do have literally never been done before. So he's saying, you will not do good work here if you don't have fun experimenting and learning. Low stakes in a novel context. Because all of this, I'm talking to you, it's intellectual stuff. I need my students to get a visceral appreciation for how we hold ourselves back and are unwilling to take risks in a novel context. So I do this little team exercise with them. What you can see here in the photo is a gray carpet, a rug that has a grid like graph paper on it. Now, and you see some of my students from a few years ago, and this is a funny rug. Some of those squares, when you step on them, they emit a very annoying beeping sound. Some of them are perfectly quiet. And I tell the team, your job is to find the path of non-beeping squares from one side of the carpet to the other. They say, okay, fine. Now, what we see, by the way, I'll share the formula with you, but don't tell anybody, okay? So this is it. The X is a beep, and the non-X is so you can see it's a little tricky, right? They have to kind of, there's some dead ends, but they have to discover it. Now, how do you discover it? There's no way to look at it. You can see right there. You can't see. You can only discover it through trial and failure, right? Now, trial and error, trial and failure. It is an error, by the way, if we've stepped on a square before and it beeped and we step on it again, that's a mistake. We don't want that. But if we've never stepped on it before, that's what I call a beep going forward. It's just data, right? So here they are. Now, what do we see in this photo? We see this young woman like this. And by the way, you see they all have to take turns, right? It's not just one person. They have to take turns. So everybody has this experience. Now, what she's showing us is what you do, what they all seem to do on the front lines, right? Like no one's been on this row yet. So she's hesitating. You can't see it because it's not a video, but she might be there 30 seconds or more, not stepping, waiting for one of her team members to tell her what to do. And, I forgot to say, it's a time limit. They have to solve it in 20 minutes or else they fail. So guess what? They usually fail, right? So, okay. So, well, that's kind of too bad because they're pretty smart, right? And this is pretty straightforward. So in the debrief, I say, when you were on the front line, right, in the about to step into new territory, what was going through your head? And here's what they almost always say. I didn't want to make a mistake or didn't want to let the team down. It's a beep. It's not a mistake, right? It's only a mistake if you step on an old beep. A new beep is not a mistake. So then why do I do this? Because it seems like a lot of sort of effort. Because what happens is just emotionally they get it. They get when they're leading an innovation project, this is the self-talk that most people have. So, like David Kelly understands, they don't want to try things that might not work. They only want to try the tried and true, right? So they will hold themselves back despite the necessity of experimentation that goes up as we go to the right. We don't want them holding themselves back. So the lesson here is, they fail to titrate. They fail to rein in their vigilance. They're too vigilant. They have a management mindset in an innovation task. And so really the lesson is have fun experimenting when the stakes are low, and it's hard to imagine lower stakes here, but we all do this. So we have to set the stage. Here's just for you, as leaders, as team members, how often, you ask yourself, do I emphasize an inspiring purpose? And then how frequently do I call attention to context, to how much is known and what's at stake, to clarify the importance of voice and risk? Right? So that's kind of the leadership self-assessment question here. Now this one's the second one, that's the first one. That's hard to explain. The second one is easy, right? Just because you've set the stage doesn't mean people are automatically going to experiment in thoughtful, smart ways or report failures quickly. So you got to create space and you got to clarify the difference between preventable, basic and complex, and intelligent, unpreventable failures. Let me give you just a couple of tricks and tools. This is the most important of all, truly. I think this is the leader's most important tool is the good question. What's a good question? It's generally not yes, no. It's never a leading question. It's a question that invites thought, right, about a particular topic. So for example, there's a set of questions that are very good questions that help us go broad. What are we missing? What other ways are there to think about it? Or my very favorite, which is, who has a different perspective? And you know why that's my favorite? Because I have listened to way too many executive team conversations where they're talking about something very important, strategic. And then at the end of the conversation, the leader says, anyone have a different view? Quiet, right? Not very helpful, right? Because what's the frame in that question? Who's brave enough to slow us down? Whereas this one, what's the frame here? Who has a different perspective? I know one of you has a treasure that we could use. I just don't know which one of you it is, right? It's an inviting question. The other kind of good question are the kind that help us go deep. Walk us through that. Tell us about how you're seeing it. What concern do you have? How might that work in action? And so on. These are questions. They tend to be what questions or how questions that help people reveal and release their thinking for the good of the team. I won't go into this one in too much detail, but this is another simple tool. Given the predilection of groups to converge, to engage in groupthink, to just sort of go, okay, we got this, like, let's move on, get through the agenda. It is often the leadership responsibility to insist on an exploratory response. Not all the time, but when the issue is important and uncertain. And the way you do that is you remind people, hey, we don't know. You know, David Kelly or Ray Dalio, we've never been here before. You know, our knowledge is uncertain at best. To invite, you know, learning and problem solving, to ensure that people are actively speaking up and with dissenting views, and to be very directive on the process, but as a leader, a little bit less directive on the content. This is utterly natural. That's like the management mindset. It's the water. It's natural. Doing this more exploratory response is unnatural. It must be led. So I won't go through this one, but this is just a little toolkit, right? Which is basically, how do you do it? No, it doesn't have to take all day. It's just, what do we know? What do we not know? I wish we knew. Oh, what might we be missing altogether? Very creative. And what are the implications of that for the current plan? In which case, if you realize you don't know enough, you go get some more data because the stakes are high. If the stakes are low, no problem. Just experiment and have fun with it. This is my criteria, but I've rephrased each one as a guide now. Instead of criteria after the fact, it's a toolkit, a set of questions to ask yourself before you start, right? You know, what aspect is new and unknown? What would be accomplished if we're willing to take risks? What do I know and not know? What might work? And finally, how will I keep it small and safe, not overly expensive, embarrassing, or dangerous? And then finally, how will I plan to learn from it? So this is all just, you know, a way of thinking about smart risk. So ask yourself, right? How much space do I carve out in my life, in my team, in my work environment for exploration? How often do I ask good questions or initiate exploratory conversations? All right, last but not least, how do you respond? You've set the stage. You've invited exploration and experimentation. I'm going to say respond productively. Respond in a way that reinforces a climate of learning. Share knowledge about failures, smart and otherwise, as widely as possible. Why? Because we want to increase the chances that we don't repeat them. And reward people for speaking up about mistakes, problems, and failures alike. Let me ask a provocative question, perhaps, because again, my Silicon Valley happy talk. Should you go so far as to have failure parties? Right? Failure nights? Uncomfortable laughter, right? Well, let me suggest maybe yes. And of course, when we talk, we're not talking champagne, right? We're talking about, you know, bring people together to learn in a productive and fun way. Back to Lily. I promised it had an interesting ending. So the physician running the trial took the fifth criterion seriously, as one does, and wanted to understand why. Why did we fail? We had good reason to believe this could work in treating this lung cancer. So they looked closely at the data, and what they found was many patients in the trial did quite well. Their cancer went into complete remission. But many other patients showed no impact at all, and statistically, there was no impact, not enough to actually clear the drug and launch it. Okay, that's interesting. So then they ask, what's the difference between these two populations, if there is one? And what they discovered was that the population of patients in the trial who did not have a positive effect from the Alimta had a folic acid deficiency. It's essentially a B vitamin. So all Lilly had to do was give patients who are taking Alimta folic acid. Nobody, it's okay if you don't have a deficiency, you can still take it, right? So all Lilly had to do was add folic acid to the mix, and it went on to rescue this failure. It became a multi-billion-dollar blockbuster drug for Lilly, and more importantly, saved many lives. Now, I can't promise you that if you take the time to learn from your failures, they will turn into billion-dollar blockbusters, right? But I can promise, if you don't, they won't, right? Makes sense, right? Now, but why the party? Well, the party, as the Lilly chief scientific officer, this is back in the 90s, put it, it rewards and celebrates the hard work, the scientific work, the physician's work of getting to this disappointing result. That still needs to be rewarded and acknowledged. Secondly, when you have a gathering, people show up. It's free pizza, right? So they come. That's good, right? And what happens? They learn. So the last thing you want in any organization is to repeat the same intelligent failure, because guess what? It's not intelligent the second time, right? No longer new territory. And number three, it turns out these little rituals in organizations increase people's willingness to come forward in a timely way, right? Because they know it's okay. They know we're operating in novel contexts. Things will sometimes go wrong. So ask yourself, how do I reward speaking up, right? Do I make it a positive experience for people when they admit their failures, when they ask for help? How do I respond to bad news? It's just a beep going forward. It's just data. Let's take it on board and use it. Or do I, by the way, in the exercise, I said that self-talk, it's like, oh, I don't want to make a mistake. Guess what the team does when you step and it's quiet? They applaud. Guess what the team does when you step and it beeps? They groan. Now they're groaning with you, right? But it doesn't feel that way. It feels like you've just let the team down. So, you have to make sure you respond appropriately, think like a scientist, to a beep going forward. What will I do to make it easy for people to share failures, to build a culture of risk-taking and learning? So to bring it all together, leading in the face of uncertainty calls upon us to have a different way of thinking about work, as Jim Wiseman put it at Toyota. We have to convey ambitious, meaningful goals, the kind of goals that get us out of bed in the morning. We have to call attention to context. How uncertain is it? What are the stakes? And then we have to invite and enable exploration. And finally, we have to celebrate learning in all its forms. So this brings me to what I will call my recipe for excellence in an uncertain world. And then I will be interested in what questions you have. So here's the recipe. It starts with aspiration, ambition, aim high. Go for gold. Go for curing the lung cancer. Go for things that right now are out of reach, but you want to make a step forward, right? And if you aim high, you're going to need to team up. You're going to need to find people who think differently than you, that bring different skills than you, and bring that together to pursue this ambitious goal. And if you pursue an ambitious goal with people who are different from you, I guarantee you'll fail. So fail well. And now we know what that means. It means do what you can to prevent basic failures. Anticipate and mitigate and prevent as many complex failures as humanly possible, and increase your production of intelligent failures. And then step 4, learn fast, right? There's a lot of learning in there. Make sure you do it. Don't just turn away. Most of us have a desire to turn away from failures. Don't. Dig in instead. And I would love to stop there, but there is a 5th step, and I would be remiss if I did not share it. So the 5th step is this: repeat, right? Going forward from here on, it will be aim high, team up, learn, fail well, learn fast, repeat. We can't get away from it, I don't think, so we need to learn to embrace it and love it. What questions do you have for me? All right.
Thank you. Now, we do have some time for questions, 2 microphones here. We ask people to identify themselves if possible, and then be brief. And then it's just to raise your hand. Yeah, there's
hands.
one hand.
And then a couple in the darker section. So start here.
Oh, there's a darker section. So
Yep.
here.
I see a couple back there, maybe 3.
Oh, there's another
Yep.
one over there.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Great.
Should I start? Is it on? Yeah. First of all, thank you very much, Professor. Such a pleasure to be here today. My name is Roberta Giannini. I'm a business professor. And
So am I.
I could only think about what the director said, that culture is a strategy for breakfast. So how to land this, and in English, how to walk the talk when it comes to organizational culture, how to implement that, and maybe you can share with us some examples of about the studies and people that you talked about, how to change, if it's possible to change organizational culture to make that happen. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. And it absolutely is. And I want to go out on a limb and say, I actually think it's easier and faster than most of us think. Right, and as you say, Drucker said culture. He didn't really, but everybody credits Drucker for saying culture eats a strategy for breakfast. But what that means is, culture is taken for granted assumptions and beliefs about behavior, what works, what's valued around here, and that's why I say we need to change our thinking to be more effective in a changing world. I probably have, I've written many case studies on companies. I probably have a dozen are specifically on culture change. The second most recent was on Microsoft Western Europe, which is one of my favorites because it was under the leadership of Cindy Rose, who came in from the outside to lead Microsoft, the 14 countries in Microsoft Western Europe. And she found a culture she believed to be very risk averse, very uncooperative, and unwilling to share ideas, and unwilling to aim high, because nobody wanted to ever fail at all. It was culturally just not appropriate at Microsoft. And she said, we're going to change this. And she later said, it doesn't take as long as you'd think. Like she says, I think she gives us a lot of credit, but she says there's so much pent up desire, right? To operate in a different way. Like people know the world is uncertain, complex. They want to be another way, she says. Now, you can believe her or not. But how did she do it? Well, it's not, I come in with a new vision. It's not a training program. It's all of it. It's about, so what I have my students do in reading the case is, what did she actually do? As president, what did she actually do? And it doesn't take them too long to identify, about 8 to 10 things. And at the end of the day, it's the whole is far more than the sum of the parts, because the things aren't in competition with each other. But they do include some workshops. They do include leadership clarity about the nature of the environment. She had to keep letting people know we are in the problem-solving business for our clients. We're not in the order-taking business. We just show up. How many licenses do you need over there at Lego? Right? No. We're what problems can I team up with you, my client, and help you solve problems? So she says we have to think about the work differently. She had workshops. She had open office hours that no leader had ever done. And because she started during COVID, these were all virtual. So every Friday afternoon at a certain time, she just opened her Teams meeting, and whoever showed up, and they'd show up and talk. She had failure parties to really dig in and understand what happened. So 10 or 12 different things, all of which are small on their own, but which come together to help people change their thinking, to be more effective in an uncertain world. And it was remarkable, right? A remarkable turnaround. The others, the other culture change journeys are similar but different. They're always context specific. I did one at a major tertiary care hospital, and that was really primarily about helping people speak up, because otherwise things go wrong, right? And so it's first you size up the context, then you figure out, how are people behaving and thinking? How well does that serve us in our goals? And how do we shift it? And it is doable in part because people are smart and people are motivated, right? They want to do the right thing if you can clear the path for them to do the right thing. So not one formula, but always the formula involves inviting other voices in.
Now we have a second question over there, but I'm just going to ask our students at the very back. I fully sympathize with you. We are training those days with TikTok just to reduce our attention span. But let's go. The last push. We are going to the last questions. If you can concentrate on that, I promise that is going to be good. So please.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I'm a leadership professor at UAB. So also thank you to IQS for opening this up to extensive to the IQS community. And my question is, since I try to bring a lot of psychological safety in class, how can professors practice the intelligence failure in class with students?
Great. I mean, I think it's a great question. And thank you. Thank you for being here. And, as you, I think you naturally are doing the other one too, but you want the classroom to be safe for speaking up, for candor, for risk-taking. I teach largely by the case method, and I want students not to just raise their hand when they think they have something brilliant, but to raise their hand to take risks, right? And it takes effort to get them to do that. But this combination of high standards and high psychological safety is where learning happens. So nowhere is it more important than in the classroom to do that. And I think you just you do it by having, probably the most important thing you can do is have a positive, by which I mean learning-oriented response when people get things wrong or take experiments that fail. So what you're really trying to do is first intellectually explain to people that the world you're going out into is a world that requires innovation, experimentation, and yes, failures along the way to success. And then you're trying to make turn the classroom into a laboratory where they can experience it viscerally. Right? So you can lecture, you can do case method, you can do team exercises. I recommend doing a mix of things, right? I think people have different modalities of learning, but the more you can put people in a position of experiencing their own self-talk and getting that flash of recognition how they are the ones holding themselves back from real excellence in an uncertain world, in part because of overlearned mindsets, then you're freeing them up. You're trying to nudge them toward a new mindset. What Carol Dweck and then Satya Nadella at Microsoft call the growth mindset, the learning mindset, because that's the mindset that we're absolutely dependent on in today's world.
Hello, thanks for the talk. I'm Eloy Carbonell. I chair Copcisa, that's a construction company.
Good.
We've identified a trend when hiring young engineers lately, is that on their first years, it's more difficult for them to take responsibility, to go up in the ladder of taking responsibilities. So this talk was very useful to me because maybe I think I've identified that that's probably because of risk of failure.
Right.
And actually recently at a recruitment event, I was asked precisely that by the students, no? What if we fail, no? So my question is, any advice on what to do, maybe on the onboarding weeks or whatever, to encourage people to take responsibilities and to...
Such a good question. And in a way, it's part intellectual and part emotional, right? Part cognitive, part affective. And the cognitive part is saying something that we all know, but still need to hear, especially from leaders, which is we in construction, you operate in a variable world. You do very little that's, brand new to the world. No one's ever tried it before. I mean, you do some, but not as often. And at the end of the day, it has to work, right? The stakes are clearly high. So you help people understand that this is the playground we're operating in, right? Or this is the environment we're operating in. Very high stakes, with mature knowledge and a desire to keep innovating, keep pushing the envelope. And clarify. So I think the most important thing you do is you clarify the difference between, preventable failures and intelligent ones. And in your world, intelligent ones are in the lab, right? They're in the simulator. They're behind closed doors. They're on the computer screen. They're not out in the field. And so if you can free them up to learn as much as possible about what will work reliably, 100% of the time once we leave, then you have freed them up to be willing to take risks, both in the lab and interpersonally, meaning, I don't quite understand this. Could someone explain it to me? Most of us don't like to do that. But if you clarify the context such that they understand, so I think the onboarding, the leadership training that you have, the middle managers, how they show up, that we keep sending the message, the absolutely vital message that we need to hear from you. We need you to take risks, but they have to be small and smart and not out, there, not there. People will catch on because they're smart, right? They're smart and they want to stretch, right? They want to try something new. So I think it's in the onboarding message. It's in the training and experience you have. It's being clear about where it's okay to experiment, where it's not okay to experiment, and then finally make it discussable. Make sure this conversation never stops, not just in the onboarding, but once you're working with us, we're always engaging in a conversation about uncertainty, about what do we know, what do we not know. Right? We're always reaching around to our colleagues to get the treasures that are buried in their heads. And that's how, when it counts, we're operating safely and accurately 100% of the time. So new mindset, right?
Okay, so we have time now for final questions. There's one over there. Can I see any other questions?
One here.
Yes,
one
so we
here.
have 2 final questions.
Perfect.
Perhaps 3 final questions.
Great.
Okay, 4 final questions.
I'll be
very
concise.
quickly,
I'll do better.
very
I'll do
quickly,
better.
if you can put your questions, please.
Pressure. Lots of pressure. I'm Amia. I'm not a student here, but I am an ex-student of Flavio from like 20 years ago. I wanted to share an experience that I had. I had a hackathon project called Fail Fast.
Ooh.
This was great. It was really interesting. However, it failed. And the reason why it failed is because we were trying to create an organizational memory of failed experiments. And what we found was that when you try to remove outcome-based fails and you try to build that in somehow into the performance, what actually happens is that it stops people failing smartly. So how do we try and reconcile that?
Right. It's actually, it's nicely connected to the prior question, because in a way, and I wasn't clear enough, it is about, it's about accountability, but not about accountability for failure-free performance in the field. It's about accountability for in the case of a hackathon, something like that, right? It's about accountability for the quality of your thinking, right? Are you willing and able to do smart experiments, right? Smart experiments that help us, move the ball down the field. Because if you're just playing around with resources, that's nice, right? But it's not as helpful or productive as it would be if you focused your energies. And by the way, and I think this is really important, it's a team sport, right? So the best possible fail fast or hackathon event is one where I got some ideas, but I know that Flavio can make my ideas better. So we talk, we brainstorm, and then we test. And if everything we test works, we haven't done our job. But if everything fails, we also haven't done our job. There's a kind of calibration conversation that I think we need to have to get people to feel responsible for results, but not feel embarrassed about shortcomings. And that sounds like their intention, and they are, but they also are compatible. And I think your job in setting up an event like that or in running a firm is to sort of clarify how and why they are compatible. How and why we want you to feel ownership. That's what accountability is. Ownership of results, but also a willingness to lean in, right? To stretch, to do things that haven't been done before, to depend on your colleagues to do them and do them well.
Very good. So we have to very quickly, questions please here. And then a final question from a student. So you're two.
Gotcha. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm David Chavez. I'm operational management lecturer at UAB. Well, it seems for me that there's an elephant in the room, but nobody has referred to before. is like artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
So what it means, I came across some news last day that it seems like the Anthropic's opus was diminished, was dwarfed by the last version,
Yeah.
which had a lot of confusion in the companies related
Yeah.
with this environment. So they're kind of concerned about that. So what I mean is, how could we can take this tool, but it's not a tool, but it was much bigger than that, that can
Yeah.
prevent us to have an experience of failure in the process.
Right. I mean,
You know what I mean?
I forgot to mention that I don't have a magic wand or a crystal ball, right? So a couple of quick things. One, AI, Gen AI, is clearly making, I started by saying, uncertainty and interdependence are risk factors. These are now on steroids, right? There's much more uncertainty than there was 5 years ago. There's much more tight interdependence as well. Like, small deviations can now spiral out of control. The theoretical framework I've described holds, but now the question I think becomes, how can we use AI to do what we humans need to do, which is to prevent as many basic failures as humanly possible? What controls can we build in so that we can suffer fewer, not more, basic failures? I mean, for example, any system should not have allowed what happened at Citibank to happen, right? Or even at Notre Dame to happen. So it's can we use AI to increase our reliability in familiar territory, which, by the way, it's pretty good at, and to help us design the smartest, not the stupidest, experiments in new territory? And I think the answer is probably yes. But I think we have a lot of work to do to figure out how to put this very powerful tool to work for us, rather than to get us in even more trouble than we're already often in. And I think everyone in this room, especially young people, have your work cut out for you. How are we going to navigate this new accelerated period of uncertainty and novelty such that we don't suffer the harms, preventable harms, that could have been avoided with more thought, more cautious vigilance going forward? So really hard challenge, hard problem.
Thank you. As briefly as possible, please.
Sure.
It's me that you want to be brief, right?
No.
Yeah.
My name is Juanjo Marina. I'm an associate professor for entrepreneurship and innovation here at IQS. Thank you very much for the inspiring talk, Professor Edmondson. I wanted to ask you, in your research, have you found that cultural biases are interfering with the acceptance of failure? For instance, you just mentioned embarrassment.
Yeah.
I have the assumption that it's easier for you Anglo-Saxons to accept failure, maybe?
You'd be surprised.
Or maybe it's more ingrained, whereas here nobody said, I failed, or nobody's, as you said very well, nobody's supposed to be talking about their own failures.
Yes, well,
very
I mean, the short answer is cultural differences do matter, right? The social consequences of failure. As an entrepreneurship professor, you know this better than I do. There are cultural differences, and what fascinates me is they can be overcome. Right? So, in fact, that's why we have classes like yours, to sort of help level the playing field. Because if people are too embarrassed about failing, they won't succeed, right? They won't be able to take the risks that allow them to launch something really new, potentially really useful and valuable. And so, because most people are smart, intellectually, they can understand that deficit, right? They can understand and appreciate the deficit that will happen from not trying. They can appreciate that intellectually as much as they appreciate the deficit that happens when you try and fail. And so if you give them that to ponder and sort of, it's like pointing to the future that would never have happened and how disappointing that would be if you never tried. Most people can understand that intellectually. And then you've got to open up the space to allow them to experience it emotionally. That's why I do that game. But I think the best way to do it emotionally outside the classroom is through creating teams, right? Where if you're part of a team, a startup team, behind closed doors, you can say, oh, this is really scary. We don't want to fail, but we also don't want to hold ourselves back from not having tried, right? So it's, better to have tried and failed than to have never tried again. People know that, and they can learn that and appreciate that, I promise, in any culture there is. And they can see case studies where that has worked for them. Work for countrymen and women, and they can see case studies in other contexts as well, and they can decide whom they want to emulate. Right? That's a great question.
Very good. Now, traditionally last but not least, please, question.
Thanks, Professor, for your content and also how you share it. My name is Nicolau, and I'm an architect, or at least I have 1 feet in the academia and 1 feet in the industry, which makes me ask, all right, you consider mostly mistakes are due to behavioral terms. Now, it's also been framed on social terms.
Yeah.
But I have the feeling since Roman or maybe Egyptian times, it also can be related to institutionalization.
Yeah.
So as larger systems grows, a lot of bureaucratical or how to proceed terms appear, which in my opinion makes foster race down. So firstly, I would like to know if you agree or not, and if you are, I would love to hear do you have any alternative of open institutionalization systems which allow to mistake. And secondly, I would like to know if you always see a correlation between high stakes and this non-fun approach that you find in low stakes.
Well,
or not.
okay. So let me say, yes, I think institutions matter. And I think institutions, particularly educational institutions, but also governmental and business institutions, can increase the chances that people understand what kinds of thoughtful experiments are valued and needed for our progress as a society, and what kinds are unhelpful. Our architecture was my first love. I wasn't good enough to stay in it, so I commend you for that. But I'm passionate about the built environment. Now, much like the construction question, right? Once you're done with your structure, we want it to work. Perfect, right? No failure allowed. But if you're not willing, so institutionally, we have to clarify, we have to help people understand where to fail, where to experiment. Behind closed doors at IDEO, try anything, see what works, go out on a limb, and then bring the lessons from the failures back to inform your next hypothesis. And now I forgot the second question. Was
Me too.
what?
Me too.
Oh, you too. Oh, that's terrible. Because I liked the second question. Anyone remember the second question?
Now, the relation in between high stakes and also the
Oh yeah.
if you cannot have fun
Okay, perfect.
when-
So high stakes. Yes. Can you have fun? Working in a hospital. Yes, you can. But not at the bedside. I mean, you can have joy at the bedside, but you're not playfully experimenting at the bedside. You're experimenting in the lab or in the simulator, right? More and more great healthcare organizations have simulators, meaning go and try things that are hard and different that you might fail in a safe way that won't hurt anybody. So yes, we can have fun when the stakes are high, but in that moment, right? In that moment where someone could get hurt, or millions could be lost, or reputations could be harmed. Those are the moments where we bring all of our focus and care to getting it right. right? So it's the wisdom to know the difference.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, now before we finish, I know you want to thank her very warmly and very much. So I simply want to mention that what we try to do here is at the same time that we have participants, I would say from all universities that we have. In Barcelona, we saw UAB, UB, UPF, and so many others, and from our university, Ramon Llull, here as well. And we have faculty, and we have people from 2 schools. We always try to be inclusive and to put the students. And what I realized today is that we had a failure because we didn't put lights over there.
Yeah.
And that changed. But it's an intelligent failure because we are
New
changing
territory.
that for next
Yeah.
time. We are going to
Yeah.
put plenty of lights there. But just to say that more than a talk, I think today than we had, I think we had lessons, and I feel for the work I do, and I'm delighted that the general director is here today as well. I think we have, I finished the talk with a sense of responsibility for things that we have to do after we had the privilege of listening to you. So thank you so very much for being with us.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.